CSGO now features 19 different knives, and not all of them are going to make you run faster, jump higher, and hit headshots. But I believe that some of them absolutely will. So I'm going to make sure that by the end of the day, you know exactly which of these knives belongs on top. And I'm going to be judging these knives based on three criteria. First, the overall aesthetic of the knife. Secondly, the pull-out animation. And thirdly, will be the in-game inspection or inspections. Some of these knives having infinite loop inspects and rare inspects. We'll take all of that into consideration. But one thing I'm not taking into consideration is the different paint finishes for these skins. I am talking vanilla knives today. Only vanilla knives. We don't want to get into that can of worms where we start thinking about color combinations, etc. So we're just going to keep it nice and vanilla. And I'm going to keep this one pretty quick. I think it's good to start with a knife on each end of the spectrum. So I'm going to throw the butterfly up in the S tier because this knife has the best animations in the entire game. I mean, it is the equivalent of a fidget spinner, and it's going to distract you and it's going to get you killed, but you're going to have a lot of fun using this knife. The inspect to reload cancel combinations almost seem infinite with it. But it deserves a spot at S tier. There's a reason this knife has now like tripled in price. There may never be anything like it again. And for that reason, I think it belongs up and above everything else. But all the way at the bottom of the list, that's the gut knife. Yeah. Let's be real. This thing has wonky dimensions. It's got an ugly hook on the back of it. It has no redeeming qualities in terms of inspect because it's one of the original knives. So I put the gut knife down there in D so that you understand between what knives we are placing the rest of them. I think now we really begin this list. The bayonet comes up first. And I think the standard bayonet has one of the sweetest pull-out animations. The way he kind of spins it over the back of his knuckle protectors. Dude, it's just clean. The in-game inspect as well is just pretty basic. There's nothing too flashy about it, but it's the pull-out animation that really gives the bayonet an edge. I think the dimensions are really cool as well. It's slim, it's sleek, and I place this in the A tier. Bowie knife. Well, the Bowie knife is the only knife that actually has only one hand visible while you have it equipped. That's right, your left hand when you pull out the Bowie knife somehow just disappears. And I think once you see that, you can't unsee it. It makes me uncomfortable. And I find this knife is just uncomfortable in general. It's really big, almost too big. I like some girth to my knife, don't get me wrong, but the Bowie knife just doesn't do it well. The handle's pretty clean. I like you know, the military / explorer color scheme it's got going for it. But in general, I think this thing's a little too hefty. So D tier as well. And I'll spoil this. These are the only two knives that I consider down in D tier. So we've got them out of the way early on. The classic knife. Now this is one that doesn't hit the nostalgia box for me. I don't have that level of appreciation for this knife, but I understand that it does belong in the hearts of many. The inspects on the classic knife are really cool. There's a throwback to the old inspect when it was originally in 1.6. And for that reason, I think I'm not going to be harsh on this knife. I think it looks really cool. It has a very, very unique handle in that it's very squared. It almost looks like no other knife in the game. And obviously, that's because it comes from a previous Counter-Strike. So this is just overall pretty cool, especially with one of the pullout animations being a backflip with the knife. When he equips it, he flips it. And that right there, that sentence is always going to guarantee a B tier, in my opinion. Falchion Knife. The Falchion Knife is underrated. It's not great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to pull a Hail Mary and throw this one at the top of the list, but I am not also going to throw it down in D because the pull-out animation on the Falchion spins it in the palm of your hand. Open hand, spin in the palm. And if you equip and unequip, if you QQ it constantly, quick switching like you would the Bayonet to get the flip behind the knuckles, then I think the Falchion actually has some value. Now, the basic inspect is ugly. No redeeming quality there. But this knife does have an incredibly rare inspect. And I say incredibly rare because as the newer knives have come out, the rare inspects have become more common. You can get them more regularly. The Nomad, for example, almost feels like when he stabs himself and kind of shakes it off, it's more common than the regular pullout. But the Falchion knife has a pullout and a rare inspect that balances it in the palm of your hand. And I think that's really cool. So personally, I'm going to put this in the C tier. It's not D tier because of the palm spin, but there's not much going on here. Next up, we've got the flip knife. Now, the flip knife, again, one of the original knives added to the game. I think this thing used to be considered down with the gut knife, but has since kind of returned to glory in a little bit of form. It's got a very basic pullout, just flips it. It's in the name. No rare inspects, but nice and dainty. You know, as much as you want some girthy M9s, you've also got to have the dainty flips. And that's why we stick this in B tier. Arguably C, but it's got some of that original knife release, redemption to it. Next up, we have the Huntsman. Now, the Huntsman knife, pretty clean. I think it's comparable to the M9 Bayonet, but it does have a really cool blade finish in that the edges of the blade, both on the end of it and on the back of it, are angled. So you have two types of metal finishes within one knife, and a pull-out inspect or pull-out animation that really gives this one some value. Every time you pull this knife out, he's going to spin it inside of his hand. It spins constantly. So a QQ pull-out that I think is very underrated, and a size that I think gives you some good bang for your buck. You know, you want pixels when you have such a hefty price tag. More pixels, better. Bigger knives, better. Huntsman, B. B tier kind of taking some of the weight at the moment, but that may change because up next we've got the Karambit. Again, Karambit released with the game, one of the all-time classics, and what I consider to be the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity are the three best knives released when the Arms Deal update first came out and knives became a thing. So I'm immediately just going to throw the Karambit up with the original Bayonet and the M9 Bayonet. These A-tier knives have aged incredibly well. The Karambit's pullout when he spins it around his hand, again, one of those pullouts that you can constantly spam and it never gets old. The inspect when he turns it again in his hand kind of opens up some possibilities with reload, inspect, cancels. These three knives belong in A tier, and that will never change. They've gotten better with age, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. It's almost unarguable in my opinion. These three knives are the pillars of CSGO knives. Then we get to the Navajo. The Navajo is a fancy flip. It's got a wood finished handle. It's got a much smaller blade, but it does also have some intricate detailing within the blade as well. So the Navajo knife is, I think it's cool, but there's nothing really glorious about it. It doesn't have an amazing pullout. It doesn't have a rare inspect. It doesn't have an infinite loop. So the Navajo is something that I put alongside the Falchion at C tier. Next up, we have the Nomad Knife. Now, the Nomad Knife has a rare inspect, and that's when your player stabs himself in the hand and shakes it off. It's also one of the only knives that uses both hands to do the pull-out animation. He pulls it from right to left in his left hand and then grabs the handle with his right to kind of equip this knife. And that is where sometimes he'll stab himself in the fingers. To me, it feels a little bit gimmicky. Like it's, to me, it's almost like an ode to like the original rare inspects or rare reloads of like the Battlefield series. So I don't personally rate this one very, very high, but at the same time, I think it does have a very unique handle in that it's a full metal finish. And I like the dimensions of the blade. It's a small compact knife, but it's not dainty like the Flip or the Navajo. So I personally throw Nomad up here in the B tier along the Huntsman, the Flip, and the Classic. Next up, we've got the Paracord Knife. Now, the Paracord Knife does have some pretty cool inspect animations. It's a newer knife, so it has that benefit of being, a full package, unlike the original knives. The problem with the Paracord Knife is that it has a sound bug. Yeah, that's right. Whoa, curveball, sound bug, but we're talking about skins. Some skins have audio design, much like the butterfly knife, which I think has 10 on 10 perfect sound quality. Every one of the inspects has this little bit of sound to it. There's a clanginess to the butterfly knife that just makes it work. But when your player inspects the Paracord knife and flips it in his hand, I'm sorry to ruin this for you, the audio cue of the flip in the hand is half a second behind. So only after he's caught it do you hear the whoosh of the flip. And that bothers me to no end. Overall, I think it's a very unique knife. The rope cord finish on the handle, there's nothing else like this. And the blade itself is pretty cool, man. It's got a very nice pointy finish to the end of it. It's unique. And I think the Paracord deserves some credit for that. But personally, I'm not going to throw it up too high. So much like the Nomad, I think we put it in the B section. It's overall a nice knife, but it's not going to be anything amazing. It's not going to, it's not going to help your flick shots, man. Simple as that. Next up, we've got the Shadow Daggers, aka the Swagger Daggers. And these hold a place close to my heart. I'm biased when it comes to the Shadow Daggers. It's the only knife where you get two knives. It's a plural knife. Some would say two is better than one, but that is not the case with the Shadow Daggers. They do have redeeming qualities in the inspect cancel spam. Every time you inspect the Shadow Daggers, he simultaneously flips them around in his hands. So if you spam your inspect and reload key, you can get an infinite loop where he just constantly spins them in circles. And that is pretty cool. It gives you that kind of fidget spinner feel that the butterfly does, but on a budget level, most certainly. So Shadow Daggers, they're not very nice. And much like the Paracord, they also have a bug. When you right click and make contact with Shadow Daggers, you have a screen shake. Your entire screen will shake up and down. That's been a bug that was released with the knives, and Valve have just never fixed it. So whenever I know there's bugs within knives, inside of the animations, the audio, or just the impacts, you've got to throw them down a tier or two. So Shadow Daggers, C tier. Next up, we've got the Skeleton Knife. Now, of all the things that Valorant stole from Counter-Strike, this is where we got them back. That's right, we've got Jet's knives in our game, and they're pretty freaking cool. There's obviously an infinite loop with this skin, and that makes it, I think, incredibly high up on this list. What I mean when I say infinite inspect loop is that there is a moment of the inspect where if you hold down your inspect key, this knife will just continuously spin on your finger until you let go. Nothing will stop it other than yourself or your enemies. And there aren't many knives like this. In fact, the only infinite spin knives or the infinite inspects are the Skeleton, the Talon, and the Ursus. Each with their own set of inspections, of course, but the Skeleton Knife, oh man, it's something special. It's got tape around the grip, not a wooden finish, and the fact that we stole it from Valorant, we're going S tier, baby. That's right, the butterfly is not on its own. Any knife that has an infinite inspect loop, in my opinion, has an inherent value that is just really rewarding to spam. You ever spin a knife in circles, defuse a bomb with your other hand? Because that feels pretty damn good. Skeleton Knife, S tier. Next up, we've got the Stiletto. Now, I've thrown around the word dainty, and there is nothing daintier than the Stiletto knife. When you inspect the Stiletto, your character literally holds it with 3 fingers, as if he doesn't want to break the thing in half. Now, I'm not going out and slashing people down with a stiletto, but I could definitely jab you in the neck. You know, it's got that precision to it. It's got almost an elegance to the stiletto, especially with the wood finish. The inspections within the Stiletto aren't anything to really get too excited about, but I think it's clean and I think it deserves some respect. So I put it right in the middle of the pack. The Stiletto is a B tier knife. We're down to 3. Up next, we've got the Survival Knife. The Survival Knife, in my opinion, has an ugly handle, has an ugly blade, and with some kind of cool inspect mechanics, maybe this is an underrated knife that I just haven't seen the value in yet. But for the sake of finishing this tier list, C. Now we've got 2. I talked about infinite loop inspects, and both the remaining knives have those inspects. The Talon is essentially a heftier Karambit. The pull-out animation on a Talon, your player will flip it forwards, flip it back. The regular inspect will spin it in your hand to observe the blade, much like the Karambit. And if you get the infinite inspect, then he's spinning it around his finger for as long as you hold the F key. I think that inspect mechanic is actually what puts this above the Karambit. In the Karambit versus Talon argument, and I mean wars have been fought over this argument, the Talon is cleaner, or excuse me, no, you heard me. The Talon is cleaner. The handle is hefty. You've got that what feels like ivory finish. Dude, the Talon is just a Karambit wrapped in money. So for that reason, I put Talon in the S tier. Talon gang forever, my friends. And finally, we have the Ursus Knife. Now, I've left this one to the end. And the reason is this may be debated. Everything else you've heard so far has been fact. But the Ursus Knife, seeing as it has an infinite inspect where he spins it through his fingers like a pen, that's valuable. The problem with this knife, of course, is that the rubberized grip is actually larger than the blade itself. So you get this weird offset in the dimensions where the blade isn't the biggest part of it. And I think that kind of makes it seem very underwhelming. Not to mention the grip in the center of the knife. It's not the best. I understand why people aren't necessarily fans, but the inspection, far too valuable. I believe that the Ursus Knife is one of the most underrated knives in this game, and to finalize our definitive CSGO knife tier list, I will put this at A tier. And we're done. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Scrawn Dog Skinventory Knife Tier List. Argue in the comments below.